Hey, you know how lately when you're buying stuff online, or maybe even in stores, the price just feels a little different?
Yeah, a bit higher sometimes.
Or you see some new little charge tacked on at the end of your online checkout. It's not just your imagination, apparently. And today we're going to dig into a big reason why. These things called tariff surcharges that are starting to pop up.
Exactly. It might seem like just a small line on your receipt, but it's actually a sign of some pretty big shifts happening in, how countries trade with each other.
Right.
So we're going to look closely at how these decisions made, like at a government level, about tariffs are actually finding their way into the prices you and I pay every day.
And to really get a handle on this, we dove into a recent report from CBS News. It does a pretty good job, I think, showing how all sorts of businesses are reacting.
Reacting to these tariffs, yeah, the ones the Trump administration put in place.
And also how other countries are responding with their own tariffs. It's kind of fascinating, actually. Maybe a little unsettling, too, to see how quickly this is playing out for companies, big and small.
Absolutely. Now, for anyone listening who's maybe not super familiar, let's just quickly break down what a tariff actually is.
Good idea.
Think of it like this. It's basically a tax on goods that are brought into one country from another country.
Okay.
Now, there can be lots of complicated reasons why governments do this, trying to help local industries, sometimes national security,
Right.
stuff like that.
Right. The politics of it.
Exactly.
Hmm.
But the immediate effect, the one we really notice as consumers,
Hmm.
is pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
It makes those imported goods cost more.
Gotcha. So our goal today really is to connect the dots for everyone. We want to show how these big policy decisions, in Washington or other capitals, turn into those higher price tags.
Or those new little fees you're seeing when you shop.
Yeah, whether it's groceries or like a new gadget online. We're going to try and skip the really heavy economic jargon and just show what's really behind the changing costs of the stuff we buy.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's start with the initial punch these tariffs packed. What's the big takeaway from that CBS report on this first impact?
Well, the CBS News report makes it pretty clear that, yeah, the tariffs put in place by the Trump administration are definitely causing costs to go up for businesses here in the U.S.
Okay.
Right now, there's apparently a 10% tariff that applies to, well, pretty much all goods coming into the United States, which is, pretty broad net.
10% on everything. Wow.
Pretty much. But then when you look at specific countries, especially ones we import a lot from, the impact can be much, much larger.
Like China, for instance. We get a ton of stuff from China, right?
Exactly. Yeah, the report points out that some products coming from China are now facing tariffs as high as 145%.
Whoa, 145%. That's huge.
It's a massive jump in cost for those specific goods as they enter the country. And as you might expect, China didn't just, sit back and take it.
They hit back.
They responded.
Yeah.
They put their own tariffs on goods that American companies export to China, and those have gone up quite a bit, too. The report says from 84% to as much as 125% on some items.
Okay, so it's definitely a two-way street then. Costs going up for imports and for our exports going there.
Yep, costs increasing on both sides of that trade relationship.
Okay, so it sounds like these tariffs are making things more expensive for companies bringing goods into the U.S. and also for American companies trying to sell their stuff in places like China. What happens next then? It seems like these businesses can't just absorb all those extra costs themselves, can they?
That's really the key point, isn't it? Businesses, big ones, small ones, they're largely starting to pass those added costs on to us.
To the consumers.
To the people buying their products, yeah. The report gives some really clear examples of how this is playing out across different industries. I mean, ultimately, businesses operate on margins, right?
Right.
And these added tariff costs, well, they often can't be absorbed without really hurting their ability to make a profit. So they have to find a way to factor them into their prices.
Right. Like Amazon. I mean, who doesn't buy stuff on Amazon these days? Their CEO, Andy Jassy, actually said publicly he expects these tariffs to lead to higher prices.
Yeah, for a wide range of things we buy.
He made the point that, a lot of what's sold on their platform comes from third-party sellers. And they're almost certainly going to pass along any extra tariff costs they're facing.
Exactly. And it's not just the giants like Amazon either. The report highlights that all sorts of companies, from maybe your local corner store to big national brands, have already announced they're raising prices, specifically because of President Trump's tariffs.
So it's happening already.
It is. And we're also seeing some interesting changes in how we as consumers are behaving because of all this.
Oh, yeah. Like what? Are people, like, stocking up on canned goods again or something?
Yeah, maybe not quite that level of frenzy, but there is a sense that some people are trying to get ahead of potential future price increases.
Really?
Yeah, the report mentions some consumers are preemptively buying things they think might become more expensive,
Yeah.
especially if these reciprocal levies, that's basically tariffs other countries might put on us in response,
Okay.
which were paused when the report came out, if those actually go into effect.
So people are trying to buy before prices go up even more.
It's kind of like trying to guess what's going to be on sale, but like in reverse, buying before the price hike.
It's like trying to predict the future, but for your shopping cart. Okay, now this whole tariff surcharge thing you mentioned, that's really grabbing my attention. It's not just a general price increase, but like an actual separate charge you might see listed.
Yeah,
What's the
exactly.
deal with that?
This is where some companies are being really, really direct about linking price increases specifically to these tariffs.
How so?
Instead of just quietly raising the overall price of their products, which some are doing, others are specifically labeling a part of the cost as a tariff surcharge.
Oh.
It's basically a way of
Okay.
being upfront with consumers about why they're suddenly paying more.
And the report had some really specific examples of companies doing this, right? Like Labuck, that high-end shoe company in Italy.
Yep, Lubbock. They were very clear that a potential U.S. tariff on goods from the EU, even though it was temporarily put on hold at the time,
Right.
was forcing them to increase their prices, not just once, but twice in a pretty short period.
Wow, twice?
Yeah, they announced a 10% price increase in April and then another roughly 10% in May, and they directly connected it to that potential 20% U.S. tariff.
So they basically said, this is because of the tariff situation.
Pretty much. Their message was, look, these increases are a direct result of the trade situation and, frankly, essential for their business to continue to stay sustainable.
Makes sense from their perspective. And then there was Dame, the sexual wellness brand. Their approach seemed even more direct.
Oh, yeah. They actually added a flat $5 Trump tariff surcharge to all their online orders.
Just straight up called it the Trump tariff surcharge. That's pretty bold, you have to admit.
It is quite direct, isn't it? And their CEO, Alexandra Fine, she explained that even that $5 charge doesn't cover all the extra costs they're facing.
Really? Even $5 isn't enough.
Apparently not. And she made another really important point that their entire industry relies heavily on manufacturing in China. So they're feeling the impact across the board.
Ah. Okay, so it's not just them, it's everyone in their field.
Exactly.
Huh.
But what I found most interesting was her reasoning for making it a separate charge like that.
She wanted to be totally transparent, right?
Right.
To make sure people knew this extra cost wasn't just them trying to, like, pad their profits.
Precisely.
Yeah.
She said their goal was, and I think this is a quote, to remind people that this is an extra tax on us and to help consumers understand that the higher price they're seeing is a direct result of these tariffs imposed by the government. It's a very, very clear way of linking those high-level policy decisions to what ends up on your credit card statement.
Yeah, you can't miss that connection.
And we saw a similar kind of thing from Micron, the U.S. company that makes computer chips.
Oh, yeah, they make chips. What did they say?
They mentioned they were going to pass along the costs from higher U.S. tariffs on goods coming in from Canada, Mexico, and China.
So Canada and Mexico, too, not just China.
Right. Passing those costs on to the companies that buy their chips. So it's not just about stuff coming from overseas that we buy directly as consumers. It affects businesses buying from other businesses, too.
That's a really important point. It ripples through the whole system.
Absolutely. These tariffs can have ripple effects throughout the entire economy, impacting supply chains in really complex ways, sometimes involving countries that are geographically close and have strong existing trade ties, like Canada and Mexico. And then there's Honeywell Building Automation. They took a slightly different approach. They implemented a 6.4% tariff surcharge on their building management systems.
Okay, 6.4%. But what stood out to me with them was that they specifically said they'd remove that surcharge as soon as the tariffs were no longer in effect.
Yeah, that caught my eye, too.
That level of detail and that commitment to reversing the charge if the tariffs go away, that seems pretty noteworthy, doesn't it?
It does. It suggests they really see this as a temporary measure, something directly tied to the tariffs, rather than just, an excuse for a permanent price increase.
Which you might suspect sometimes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, it's also interesting to see how other companies are navigating this. Not everyone is choosing to add a separate surcharge, right?
Some are trying different strategies.
Yeah, different ways to deal with these added costs.
Like these pre-tariff sales we're starting to see. That almost feels like a marketing trick sometimes, playing on people's worries that prices are about to jump.
Exactly. The report actually quotes a marketing professor, Denise Shaw, from Georgia State University.
Okay. What did he say?
He explains that all this uncertainty created by the tariffs can actually lead to what he calls irrational consumer behavior.
Irrational. Like what?
Things like panic buying, stockpiling,
Yeah.
you know, these pre-tariff sales really tap into that underlying anxiety. They encourage people to make purchases now before prices potentially increase later.
It's a bit of a gamble for us as consumers, though, isn't it? Because there's no real guarantee prices will actually go up, or if they do, by how much.
Sure.
But it definitely creates a sense of urgency, doesn't it? Buy now or pay more later.
It absolutely does.
Mm.
And some companies are using it in really creative ways. There's this example of Burlap and Barrel, which is a spice importer.
That's spices, okay.
They had what they call the spring cleaning turned impromptu tariff sale, offered a 20% discount.
Okay, a sale. So
Yeah.
how is that related to tariffs?
Yeah. Well, they explained it was partly to avoid having to raise their own prices later, and also, interestingly, to support the small-scale farmers they work with.
Ah, because the farmers would be hurt too.
Exactly. They said they can't easily just switch where they get their spices from. So it's a way of trying to absorb the potential tariff impact, at least for the short term, and buffer their suppliers a bit.
That's actually a really thoughtful approach when you think about the impact on their suppliers as well.
It is. And then you've got bigger companies like Raymore and Flanigan, the furniture folks.
Yeah. What are they doing?
They're just urging people on their website to lock in pre-tariff pricing. But they don't actually give any specifics about what future prices might be.
Ah, so it's more subtle, just hinting that prices might go up.
Exactly. It creates this suggestion, the implication that prices could rise down the line without them having to commit to any specific numbers. It's more about influencing how consumers think and maybe encouraging them to buy sooner rather than later.
Got it. So when we look at the bigger picture then, how is all this affecting the economy so far? Is it a huge deal yet?
Well, according to the CBS report, it seems like it hasn't had a massive impact on overall economic growth yet.
Okay, yet being the key word.
Yet being the key words.
Yeah.
But there's definitely a feeling of unease among businesses.
Right. The report quotes a Fed official, didn't it? Saying there's a lot of anxiety among businesses because of these tariffs.
Exactly. It creates a lot of uncertainty. And uncertainty makes it harder for businesses to plan for the future, make investments, hire people.
Because they don't know what their costs are going to be.
Precisely. Businesses really thrive on predictability. When there's a lot of uncertainty about costs, about trade relationships, it makes forecasting and making those long-term decisions much, much more challenging.
Which brings us back to this idea of transparency we talked about. We saw some companies, like Dame, being super open about why their prices are going up. What do you think the impact of that kind of openness is on us as consumers?
That's a great question.
Well, I mean, on the one hand, it can be kind of frustrating, right? To see a specific charge that's directly linked to a political decision. You might feel a bit helpless.
Yeah, you might just see the higher price and be annoyed.
But on the other hand, like Alexander Fine from Dame pointed out, it does help you understand the direct connection. You see exactly why that price went up.
Right. It shows that what happens in government can directly affect what you end up paying for things. It's not just some mysterious market force at work.
Yeah, it pulls back the curtain a bit.
That's right. It shines a light on the fact that these price changes often aren't random. In many cases, they are a direct result of these tariffs. Now, whether consumers appreciate that level of transparency or just feel the pinch in their wallets well, that's another question.
Yeah, it probably depends on the person.
But it definitely changes the conversation around why prices are going up.
So, okay, to sort of bring it all together here, it seems pretty clear that these tariffs are no longer just like something you hear about in the business news headlines.
No, they're hitting home now.
They're having a very real and direct effect on the prices we're seeing on all kinds of everyday goods. And sometimes, like we discussed, they're even showing up as a separate line item on our bills, these surcharges.
And we're seeing companies react in all sorts of ways. Some just pass on the costs directly.
Others are trying to get us to buy now before potential future price hikes with these pre-tariff sales.
Right. There's a whole range of responses.
And it's really important to remember, I guess, that this whole situation is still unfolding, right? It's not over.
Definitely not. Depending on what happens with trade policies going forward, we could absolutely see further changes in prices and, in how companies are choosing to respond to it all.
It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? Knowing that tariffs can have such a direct influence on what you end up paying for the things you buy. Does it, I don't know, does it change how you think about where those products come from?
Or the bigger picture of international trade?
Yeah, exactly. It feels like these tariff surcharges, or maybe even just the constant anticipation of higher prices because of tariffs, might become a much more regular part of our shopping experience. Definitely something worth keeping an eye on, I think.